before we talk with our engineers, I think I'd just like to bring some of what we talked about into perspective, and talk about how it helps customers maximize return on investment. So, eliminating that alignment churn, right, is a big one, right? Because again, return on investment, is what's that investment? And part of that investment is all the time you spent making the thing, right? All the time you spent trying to get the outcome you're desiring. And that alignment churn that we talked about before is going to be a huge problem in order to minimize the amount of investment that you have to make, or at least being smart about that investment. So the way we do that is using that strategic mindset to connect business goals to product features, right? And that's done through like something like a goal alignments workshop, or we could even do that depending on the size of the problem with a design sprint. Creating shared understanding with and language through design artifacts, like we talked about before, with personas, prototypes, and journey maps, right? So that allows us to all be talking about the same thing, and overcoming stakeholder politics and communication issues with things like design sprints, right? And so the benefits we see, and by resolving those alignment churns, we can increase value and sooner, right? So the product actually serves the business and generates value, right? To reduce design time, faster time to production, reduction in avoidable rework, like all the stuff that we already talked about. But in the instance of enterprise product design, the product itself is a tool that enables the business, right? So, and by designing better tools, we can increase the return we get on them at the same time, right? So the money and energy invested in ensuring we create the desired impact into our goals, but also the tool itself and the impact or the outcome, right? So improving the business outcome, which again comes back to the strategic mindset to connect business goals and product features through goal alignment workshops, right? Designing data-informed solutions by prototyping, testing designs before committing to build them. And continually measuring outcomes to inform the strategy and determine the goals, right? And so by resolving those kinds of issues and making sure that we're maximizing the impact of the product, we go back to our benefits of good user experience, right? So success for the business, fewer user errors, lower training and support costs, less rework for development, right? Higher employee retention. These are the kinds of things that we want our products to do for us. So now, in order to kind of get like a different perspective, I'd like to welcome Brian Schlosser and Tracy Hires, both experienced engineers working in enterprise software development. Tracy, Brian, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Andy.
I'm glad you guys are here.
Thanks, Andy.
And so you both have experience working with design. Brian, let's start with you. So what kind of benefit have you seen for engineers when working closely with design?
Well, I think the biggest one is that there's less work for me to do, right? If I don't have a design team, right, some of that work's going to fall on me. It's nice to have their support, but it's also nice to, some of the things they do, things that I might typically not think about, while I think about engineering, it's nice to have the design team there to go off and, to do that user research and move stuff along, as well as, refining what the business's goals are, like you talked about before, so that I only have to build something once.
Yeah, so kind of just allowing you to focus on building software, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Tracy, what about you? Like, what kind of value have you seen clients experience when working with a UX team?
I think a big thing that clients get value out of that they probably don't expect is they tend to get clarity about what they're doing and why. You mentioned early in your goals workshops how that comes about, but I think often directors of IT, even business stakeholders, know they need to do something, but they don't know what it is that they need to do. Through the workshops that you conduct and the user interviews and these types of things, sometimes these people that are running projects learn new things about their business. Even if they don't, even if they knew it, it really does help focus their attention and their effort.
Right. And I think you talked a little bit about that yesterday when you were talking about the cruise project we worked on together.
Yeah, we saw that.
Right. And so So not every project gets to engage with the design team. So what kind of problems do you encounter, Brian, when design is not a part of the process?
Well, someone's like a theme I just mentioned last time I talked is, if there is no design, right, somebody has to do it, right? There's levels of which it gets done, but at some point, a lot of times it falls on the engineering team to do. And I've been doing UI development a long time, so maybe I have some good instincts about how screens should be designed, but I haven't been doing the workshops and those user studies. So, I do something, whether it's good or not is, to be debated. And,
Right.
the analogy I was talking about the other day was, well, if you're looking for a good meal, yeah, you can go to one of your engineers and ask him to make you a good meal, but you'll probably have better success if you go to a chef.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Great. And then what about you, Tracy? What kind of problems have you encountered when design is not a part of that process?
So I'd echo what Brian just said. Somebody is going to design your system. And the question isn't, are you going to get a designed system? The question is who's going to design it? And I'll tell you a story. Several years ago, I was working with a biotech company that was bringing a new cancer treatment to market. And they brought us in to help them build a new system to schedule their manufacturing production. And we built something for them, and it was called, the name of the system that we built was called IntelliVenge. That's just how they branded it at the end of the day. It was a well-designed system that did exactly what it was. It was a well-built system that did exactly what it was designed to do. But the problem was, it was designed by two business people, a couple of consultants. I was one of the consultants, and a few senior people in their IT organization. We designed the system, we built it. It did exactly what we understood the requirements to be. We handed it off to them. We went away, we worked on other things. A few years later, we were called back in to help them because what had happened was some staff at one of the plants had built, the system we built was called IntelliVenge. And on top of that, staff at the plant had built what they were calling Excelavenge, which was really an Excel spreadsheet, giant, messy thing that was built right on top of the system because the system, while it did what it was designed to do, it didn't do what the users needed. Again, you're going to get design. The question is, are you going to get the right design?
Right. Where is it going to come from?
Yeah.
Yeah. It really reminds me too of, something we've talked about before, Andy, that, I think it's fairly typical, at least for us to come in, we come in and we end up talking to the business. And it's usually business management about, okay, what do they need to get done? And a lot of times they want to tell you how the system should work. And you had a really, good observation and a way of articulating it that really caught it for me is, it's great that yes, those business users, a lot of times, they've been promoted from within and they've grown in the company and they understand what the job is that needs to be done, but they forget that they have a whole lot more context now.
Right.
And those people who are doing the job every day may not have that information. So it's really important to go and talk to the actual users that are going to be doing it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's gonna be colored differently. Mm-hmm. Different perspective, different angle. So how do you think UX helps with organizational obstacles, Brian?
When you're saying organizational obstacles, are you talking about the keeping the project on track and identifying what the goals are?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. Again, it's something you can ignore, right? Which I think is maybe a little bit of a theme that we talk about the whole time is you can ignore design and then something will happen. And some of the organizational alignment and stuff, I think that happens naturally out of doing the design. You can ignore it and something will happen. So, I think that design helps get in there and have those conversations so that you avoid some of those. It'll just figure itself out.
Right. What about you, Tracy? What have you seen? How have you seen UX help with organizational obstacles?
So I'll start with a story. A few years ago, I was part of a team that was brought in to sort of rescue a project. You had product owners writing requirements without much business or even technical input. And the development team in this case was really tripping over itself, trying to leverage the technical stack that was chosen by the architecture team, and by the way, kept changing over and over again in order to deliver on those requirements. It was a bit of a mess. The project wasn't delivering anything on really anything of value. So they brought several of us in to sort of right the ship. We made a bunch of recommendations. Among those recommendations, we said you've got to take a more holistic approach to your product ownership. You need to do design thinking. You need to a few other things that piece of advice we gave them, and really they said, "Oh, that's nice, but we don't want to do those things." We really figured out that we weren't going to be able to help this client. I'll tell you, last I heard, and I heard this not too long ago, that particular project, it's still going on. It's more than 2 years behind, tens of millions of dollars over budget. They just keep spending money and they're not getting much. We had another client who was in a similar kind of situation, missing dates. They're starting to lose, the business stakeholders are starting to lose faith in the dev team. But there they took our recommendations, and our design team, Andy, you were part of this one. They began holding design thinking workshops, and we were able to pull them out. And what we saw was suddenly, as we started to engage with these workshops, we had business people engaged with IT people. We had good communication, and that faith was restored. And we started, we were able to eliminate some of the requirements churn and some of the dev churn. But really, the organizational obstacle was this faith and this lack of communication. And by bringing people together in focused workshops, we really started to make progress there.
That's awesome. That's great. Yeah, and I remember that, and I remember one of the obstacles was not getting access to users, right? And
oh yeah, that was huge. Right, you had product owners that were afraid to go to users because they didn't want to waste their time, and so they were just writing requirements without input as best they could, and these were subject matter experts that had come up through, but what they were doing was writing based on their memory of what they needed to do.
Right.
And businesses change, but you were able to help facilitate that communication with the users in a real way.
I think one more question. So for Brian, at what stage of a project have you seen customers get the most benefit out of design engagement?
Early, at the beginning, right?
Okay.
That's when you get the most benefit, because the last project we worked on, you came in later after the business had kind of sketched out their requirements, and while you can look at that and go, okay, maybe that eliminated some work because you could get up to speed with all that thought that had already been put in. But at some point too, it means you have to go backwards and understand all those decisions that were made before, and sometimes you have to correct them.
Right.
So earlier is better. Anytime is better than never.
Yeah. That's great. And I think in that project, I do remember, we realized like some of the requirements weren't exactly 100% correct, or really it was, the requirements themselves were really just like a finger in the air, right? The actual details details were not there, right? So
Yeah.
I think that project also, had something similar to where it was,
Yeah.
it's a database with some screens, and
Yeah.
but turns out, I think we delivered over 20 mock-up screens that provided the level of detail that would allow them to see
Yeah.
all the interactions and possibilities of, right.
Yeah, the other thing I think of too, though, is that, I think some people get into the mindset of design is designing screens. That's just a little part of it, right? And that part of it actually can come a little bit later, but you can't think of, well, that's what design is, so I don't need to engage the design team. No, there's a whole lot of other stuff that goes into it. And it's also you guys getting up to speed so that when you do those designs of those screens, you know what you're doing.
Right. And that it's really, I can make a mock-up really quickly if I understand the problem thoroughly, and we have a really good model for how it should work already. That's great. So do we have any questions?
Yeah, we have a couple of questions. First, we have a comment, Brian, to your example of the chef versus the engineer. To get a good meal, yes, go to a chef, but with design in mind, the chef should be asking the design elements to understand what kind of meal you want. Get a very descriptive of what kind of flavors, smells, other intangibles come that create a good meal for you, which I thought was a really important addition.
Yes. Yep, no, I agree.
So one of the questions, and I think Brian and Tracy, you guys both have really good insight into this, is when you're building applications with tools, for example, IBM BPM, with limitations on their UI and user experience, how do you create a position for a UX designer and really open up the aperture for them?
I have a thought on that one.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, it goes right back to what I just previously said about you have to think of design as more than just the screens, right? Yes, being an IBM BPM, that does limit you to, I'm following a process, right? So I have to think more in tasks. And it does put some constraints around the design, but there's still with that, I think the design can still bring in a lot about, okay, I can go in there and, if I'm using IBM BPM, I can make this code shoot and I can make it really complicated and I can put all kinds of data in there. But is that what the user really needs? And that's what the design, regardless of what system you're going to try to put it in, you can think through those things of, okay, what really is the data that's needed? Putting more data on the screen is not a good thing, right? There are a few cases where a little bit more data will help you, but just putting it out there without thinking about it, is not good. So there are constraints, and I think our design team does a good job with that. We have that at the current customer, and it actually came up yesterday on one of the calls we had where we were talking about stories of, well, if this user does this, when they say, okay, I'm done, and it takes them to the next task in the process, well, the next task in the process is theirs. Sometimes. Right, and you have to do these, and Andy went through, and in this case, that had thought through some of those. Okay, well, maybe we can make an optimization in the process there and say, well, if you are the person and this data is already filled out, we can skip that task and we'll just put a decision gateway there and route you around it.
Andy, how do you deal with these kind of constrained applications?
Embrace the constraint, right? And I think that, again, this goes back to like the conversation of requirements versus constraints, right? When Brian and I have been working on something where it's Camunda, right? Camunda is the process engine, and there is a process, and there's only so many things Camunda can do. And in fact, sometimes sometimes Camunda and IBM BPM kind of blend to me in my mind because they're both BPM, right? So I'll go to Brian and be like, can't we do this? I think we can solve this problem by doing this. Can we do this? And he goes, that's actually an IBM BPM feature. We'd have to build that out in order to do that for Camunda, right? So then that constraint allows me to go back to the drawing board and say, how can I get the user what they need in order to do this job with the constraint of the system? And not only that, we've actually seen changes in the process because of UX, right? Going and discovering what actually needs to be done and saying, well, based on the circumstances and the context of use and what this user is going to do, then this doesn't make sense anymore. What instead we need is a ad hoc step that this person can initiate, and then this is how we would do that, right? So there can, it's using the constraints of the system, and I think that's a big principle at BP3, especially because most of our customers are enterprise level customers who already have such deep investments in the technology that they're using. So changing the architecture is not really a choice, but leveraging it is really what we want to do.
So then we have another question, which was, can you talk about how UX culture can work with Lean and Six Sigma groups? And I think that one's kind of hard, but maybe Andy, Brian, Tracy, feel free to dig in there, because I think we see a lot of Lean and Six Sigma through these process cultures, and then bringing in somebody like Andy, maybe that's oil and water, but Andy, what are you seeing?
Honestly, I think they're all the same.
Careful, that's fighting words for the Six Sigma black belts out here.
I actually think they all play together really well. And for me, it's about just changing your mindset from, it's kind of like what I talked about in that growth section. It's changing your mindset from we have the answers to a growth mindset of we can find the answers, right? And I think you can find, like in a Lean Six Sigma mentality, you can find operational inefficiencies and deal with them. But at the same, I think you still need to figure out what your goals are, right? And your goals are really going to prioritize where you put your dollars and your energy, right? So yeah, we have an inefficiency over here, but this one over here is going to fixing this one over here is going to save us $1 billion, which is this one is only going to save us 250 million, right? I don't know. And I do think that it's really just about changing your mindset from to being more experimental and allowing answers to come and to learn, instead of just already having a set on your mind made up on how everything should be. And the only reason I say that is because really what our customers are wanting is competitive differentiation and innovation for their business, so then they could respond to the market a lot faster. But you don't get that if you're just having this fixed mindset and just continuing to do the same thing over and over again.
And I'd just add, I think that systems are a combination of people, processes, and technology. And I think that Lean and Six Sigma are really focused on that second thing, processes, right? How can I make my process the most efficient and squeeze every little last efficiency out of that process? And that's good. But that's one piece of your system. So, and UX really is a little bit more focused on the people. And I think that there are ways to complement each other within those disciplines. They're a little bit different, but there's no reason why they have to be at odds or in competition with each other.
And I'll add that, whenever your mindset is to squeeze what you can out of a process, the failure mode there, to use somebody else's words, is assuming that your process is the right process. And that's where a UX mentality comes in, is what is the right process that's going to support the outcome we want, and then redesigning for that process, and then you can use those kinds of principles. And for instance, design sprints are considered a design thinking lean methodology, right? And it's because really it's a rule that I abide by is, the 80-20 rule is focusing on how we're going to get the best outcome with the least amount of investment and moving forward. So then that way we can always make steps towards improvement rather than thinking that we need to have these big bang solutions or these big bang answers. It's not. It's what's the next right thing to do, and to give us the best outcome, and doing that in steps. And the mentality being we're always just taking steps. It's the same process every day, Same process. What do I need to do next? What do I need to do next? What do I need to do next? And knowing what those things are based on where you are now. But not trying to just say, okay, now I need to like, you're not taking leaps. Leaps aren't gonna get you where you need to be, I don't think.
Yeah. So there's some good conversation happening over on the Slack organization around constrained design and how we finally reprogrammed Andy's brain to use Six Sigma terms like failure modes. So if you want to, I placed the link in the chat. You can head over to the Slack organization and join the conversation over on day 5 user experience design.
Awesome. Well, I only have a few more slides. I don't know if we have any more questions, but really I think I just want to leave with this is, I think similar to a tree falling in the woods, right? If a product is built using really a lot of fancy technologies, and fancy is maybe not even the word, but and no one wants to use it, it's not aligned with your business, does anyone care? It doesn't matter. And my interjection would be, and not to be a jerk, of course, this is really just to take the piss out of all my really smart cohorts who are engineers. But we really want to create things that are valuable and that people care about, and that and we want to do it with maximum alignment and buy-in. So that original investment is a smart one, right? We're being very smart about how we invest our time and our energy. So I don't know if there's any other questions. I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah. So the first question we have is, is Net Promoter Score part of the design process, or is that something that you would not really take into account?
Man, I think Net Promoter Score is an interesting one. I mean, I think there's a lot of like data from different organizations. I think Nielsen Norman might be one where Net Promoter Score, depending on context, is not necessarily even a great measurement of success. So I think it really depends, and I think it just really depends on the goal and the outcome you're looking for, and sometimes it even depends on the functionality you're creating in order to create that impact. So maybe NPS isn't the correct measurement, maybe time on task or some other heuristic might be more important.
So what are those heuristics that people might look for and be conscious of when they're thinking about user experience? And, is my user experience bad? This is a number that might point to that.
Man, honestly, again, I think it would say it depends on the context of the solution, the outcome, and the goal. I think, so for the example that I gave about reducing call handle time, right? I mean, call handle time is the thing you're measuring, right? But that could also come across in a lot of ways. And we might also want to say, well, what are we spending our time on? I think that there's things like I said, time on task. That's one heuristic that you can measure. You can another one would be whether someone was successful or not. So actually, like measuring whether or not we deem the task that they're performing as a success, right? Were they able to find what they wanted to find, and then figuring out how that translates to our goal is going to be important. But I think it's always dependent on the context.
So another question is, as it relates to usability design, are you using things like A/B testing? And how do you make sure to get statistical significance there?
So I think you just have to have a large enough sample size, right? You want to make sure that your sample size is relevant. I remember I heard one person say that 3 makes a pattern, but I think that's when we're talking more like guerrilla UX. But I think whenever we're doing something that's, we do A/B testing, and I think A/B testing can be really important when you're having competing ideas. It's not a default strategy, A/B testing. But when we have something that we believe is working and we have a theory on maybe an alteration to it that might be useful, then yeah, maybe we can have something in production, for instance, where 50% of our traffic is diverted to a different solution. I think another strategy we would use rather than A/B testing is maybe smaller rollouts, to where we say, okay, we did our usability testing with prototypes here. We feel more confident in this solution than the one we have, but maybe we want to roll it out to this one part. So for instance, in the telecom example, it was 33 different management areas, right? So in that instance, rolling out a solution to one management area and testing the outcomes there that we're getting versus maybe a control group. And then statistical significance, I think for us would basically just be make sure we're getting enough data to be able to confidently say, we see a difference being made here and we feel confident in what it is. And some of that's qualitative, it's not always quantitative.
Well, Andy, thank you so much for being here today. We're running a little out of time here, but this has been such an energizing day. We've had a lot of questions that we didn't get to. So you can either contact Andy or we're going to take them over into that Slack organization. The Slack organization link is in the chat. There's also a link to your Driven t-shirt, your free Driven t-shirt of turning coffee and tacos into process. So all of 2020 Driven will be available early next week on our YouTube channel. That's 5 days of content going live soon. So thank you again, Andy, and any last words?
I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think just, let's, I think, change in order to get new results. You got to change your way of thinking. And I really encourage everybody to embrace failure, embrace learning, and try something new, and embrace that discomfort.
Well, thank you, Andy, for making us all comfortable in our discomfort today. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Have a good one.